Hello and welcome to a very special live episode of Virtual Legality. It took me just a few minutes to remember exactly where all the buttons for everything are. So if I'm not transmitting or if you're not hearing me correctly, please let me know in the chat. Please let me know if I'm echoing or doing anything else like that. Hopefully, unlike previous live versions of Virtual Legality, I will have gotten the recording buttons correct and we can otherwise cover things if something happens in the world of the internet. But presuming that I am broadcasting to YouTube and the world, I wanted to take a little time out to talk about this notice that Naughty Dog put out this afternoon regarding what is undoubtedly one of the most anticipated video games of the year. Now, as I'm sure everyone who's listening to this or watching it in its archive version later knows, there's a lot going on in the world. And certainly video games and movies and pop culture and television in general are not at the forefront of the survival hierarchy of needs. I think we can all understand that. But at the same time, as I've talked about in this space before, that kind of stuff is important because right now, Americans and people across the world are being asked to comport their lives in a way that's significantly different than the way it has been comported before. And so I do think that there's a place for, as one of my favorite reviewers put it earlier this week, Tom Chick, frivolity, right? That there's a need to have the brain not constantly be focused on the impending doom and to just watch task force meetings and watch various count numbers go up and whatnot. And while The Last of Us might not be the first piece of culture that I would anticipate being useful to getting your mind on things that are less serious, if you're not familiar with the game, it's a zombie apocalypse title in which the world has faced a viral outbreak of some significance and had some issues with containing that outbreak. So maybe not the first place I would go, and maybe that helped inform some of the decision that we're about to talk about right now. But I wanted to highlight it because it's so interesting to me. From a business standpoint, this isn't a legal item so much. I suspect they have full rights within their contracts and with respect to their contract partners to do what it is that they've done, especially since video games get delayed all the time. And this is now The Last of Us Part 2's second significant delay. But more from a business standpoint about what it means for the video game industry, what it means for essentially folks that are excited about gaming to now be looking at a situation in which these games, The Last of Us is effectively done. That's what we're going to talk about as part of this commentary. These games are very likely to be delayed, not just in this instance, but from a lot of instances to come. The other major kind of pillar of the video game anticipation spectrum that I can think of in 2020 is Cyberpunk 2077. And there's every indication that that's not as close to done as The Last of Us Part 2 is. And it's already been moved from April back into the fall. And it would surprise me, honestly, seeing this commentary, seeing what's going on with respect to how people are able to produce video games and things remotely, if that game isn't delayed as well. It might get close to finished. It's very hard to say. There's a lot of moving parts for all of these companies. But even if it does get close to finish, it might be the case that they make a decision much like Naughty Dog did today. So let's take a look at this comment because I think they use a lot of interesting language. I want to talk to you about it because I think it's fascinating. And if you're new to Virtual Legality, we're not generally doing live episodes, so you'll hear this. It's a little bit more casual maybe than we usually do. You might hear me cough. It's Michigan in the springtime. I have allergies. I'm still 100% healthy. I'm okay. But I might cough in the middle of this video because that's the time of year it is here in Southeast Michigan. But let's look at the comment specifically. It says, as you've likely just seen, the release of The Last of Us Part 2 has been delayed. Very sad for everybody. Excited about that game. Looks like it's going to be a knockout. Obviously, we want that game to come out, but we also want our developers to be happy and healthy and certainly understand that every company is going through a lot of difficulty right now. We're sure this news is just as disappointing to you as it is to us. We wanted to reach out to all of you in our community to give you a little more information. Which, one thing I want to say here is that that's a great thing. There are so many companies in the gaming industry that keep all of their cards so close to their vest. And that's fully within their rights. That's basically how the industry has been organized now today. But I would love it if there were more transparency, if these companies were a little bit more able to admit when they made a mistake or when they were wrong. And one thing I would tell people that follow the gaming industry, either that report on it or that comment on those reports, is that if you want real answers, if you want real information, if you want some modicum of transparency, one thing that we can all do is not jump down these companies' throats when they say something that isn't just boilerplate. And they definitely don't say boilerplate in this statement, which is, of course, why I'm making this video, but not in an attempt to somehow dissuade them from giving us this information and not to chastise them for the decision that they're making, just to highlight that it's such an interesting decision and it's such an interesting time, obviously, in the world and in the gaming industry as a small part of that. The good news is we are nearly done with development of The Last of Us Part 2. We are in the midst of fixing our final bugs. However, even with us finishing the game, so that's an assumption right there. They say we're almost done. They would have had till the end of May to finish this up. It's early April, so they've got another month probably before things really need to be locked down. They are assuming that they will get that finished, even with the kind of remote setup. That's an important kind of implication of this statement, is that they are saying not that everything that's happening in the world today is preventing them from finishing the game, because they were pretty close to finished anyway. Remember, they were originally going to release a couple months ago, but that because of what has happened today, they've decided to delay for a different reason than you might be anticipating. It says, however, even with us finishing the game, we were faced with reality that due to logistics beyond our control, we couldn't launch The Last of Us Part 2 to our satisfaction. Now, this statement is pregnant with purpose, right? As you might remember from your old English teachers talking about such things in literature. But this is designed, obviously, to invoke everybody's feelings and understanding of what is happening today without actually using the term Voldemort in any capacity in this statement, but also to kind of hint at the issues that they would be having. What are logistics beyond our control? In general, in the making of video games, that's your pressing of your disc, that's your getting things packaged, that's getting physical items, including collector's editions and whatnot, out to people's hands. And what they are saying right here is that, okay, we were close enough that our remote working conditions, even if we lost some productivity, can probably get things across the finish line. But when they get across the finish line, we aren't going to be able to control the boats. We aren't going to be able to control the planes. And as you probably saw earlier last month, Amazon, of all people, but coordinated with other kind of supplier groups at the same time, has said we are not going to be stocking our warehouses with things that are non-essential. And so every major logistical pipeline really in the world has said, okay, video games, you're going to take a back seat. And so you're going to have to figure out a way around that. We're going to take a long time in shipping out video games. You're going to have to figure out what you want to do with that. And as you also know, if you followed Virtual Legality and you've seen how Square Enix and Final Fantasy VII Remake Project have dealt with this issue, and they're more on the borderline with what's happening right now because their release date was April 10th, they have said, hey, we're going to get all this stuff out early. We are going to send all this stuff out to Australia and Europe in particular early, and we're actually going to just open the floodgates, and everybody can play it when they get it, because if we didn't take those steps, we were looking at our logistical supply chains and seeing that we weren't going to be able to get everybody a copy on the April 10th release date that we wanted, and so we're going to send things out early. But essentially, you're picking winners and losers there, right? Because in April 10th, the people that bought it digitally would get to play it, and if you send it only then when you normally would, probably the physical players get it late. Now, the physical players get it early, which is 100% well and good. One side or the other is going to get it early in this scenario, but what has kind of popped up as a problem is that with that kind of early spread, Square Enix is trying to deal with whether or not people should be allowed to spoil things, trying to hold back those, potentially issuing copyright strikes on people that are publicizing what they've got in their fully purchased version of the game Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we went over, it's our most popular video this week, we went over their streaming conditions, including a blanket prohibition on streaming before April 10th, and talked with people in various places on Reset Era and NeoGAF and elsewhere about whether or not that's legal and how the nature of streaming as a derivative work that is largely infringing in most capacities, unless you're really performing critical analysis, probably is something that these copyright owners can control from a legal standpoint. And so it looks to me, as we continue here, that Naughty Dog is trying to avoid that scenario. And even if the game's done, they know they can't hit a specific date. And so on the one hand, they probably want some more flash. They want some more bang to whatever the marketing is that leads up to the release. Maybe they want some big events. Don't know what the marketing plan was going to be at the end of May. But they also want to make sure that the actual copies in people's hands, whether digital or physical, get there at something close to the same time. Because otherwise they have the same problem that Square Enix does right now. And even though I'm sympathetic to Square Enix and what they are trying to do, they're taking a lot of flack online and with their fan base for trying to control this kind of proliferation of information. Continuing with the Naughty Dog statement, they say, we want to make sure everyone gets to play The Last of Us Part 2 around the same time, ensuring that we're doing everything possible to preserve the best experience for everyone. This meant delaying the game until such a time where we can solve these logistic issues. Now, this portion of the statement has another bit of important kind of subtext here, and you've seen it kind of reported online in your social media already, and this notice only went up in the last hour, but this delay is indefinite because, frankly, the current state of the world is indefinite. We don't know when logistics and supply chains are going to be available to everyone. We certainly don't know when those supply chains and logistics chains are going to be available to video games. Because regardless of how you or I might feel about video games, and honestly the importance psychologically of getting fun stuff to people in order to hold the line on things like quarantine, because that fun stuff is going to keep people sane, it's clear that that fun stuff isn't the same as food, isn't the same as medical supplies, and isn't the same as other kind of health or medical related materials. So games fall into the back of the line. And Naughty Dog has said, we want to wait until we can have a big blowout, even if the game is done. And that's an interesting stance, because one of the things that happens with the making of a game is you release it and your company makes money. And your company can't make money before the game is released. And so there is a balancing test. There's a balancing act that's happening here between how long Naughty Dog wants to hold what could be a perfectly done finished product on their shelves and when they want to release it. Now, because of things outside of the various states of the world and logistics chains, and because of the nature of the way the video game industry works, it would surprise me if Naughty Dog, which is owned by Sony, doesn't want to release Last of Us Part 2 before the PlayStation 5 comes out. I think it's a pretty sure bet that they're going to want to release it before there's a significant kind of generational transition. And so it's probably not more than to the end of 2020. That also makes them available for awards and things this year, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, an indefinite delay is an indefinite delay. And when you can't plan for when you can play a game, when you can't figure out when it might release, I don't know about you, but I kind of put it in the back of my head and say, all right, well, that game comes out whenever it comes out. It almost goes into the same place as seeing a cool video at E3 that doesn't have a release date. And you're like, well, that was a neat video, and I guess we'll play it when we play it. I don't know that we've had a similar situation where they're saying that even with us finishing the game, it's going to sit on our shelf for a while. But that seems to be the state of things. And it seems to be the state of things not just because Naughty Dog wants to do this, but from a contractual basis. And we've seen this throughout kind of the digital proliferation of the video game industry. Retail, whether that's Best Buy or Target or Walmart or GameStop, although GameStop might not survive the current situation in the world. Whether or not it's any of those retailers, they have a strong position because for the longest time, publishers and certainly console manufacturers wanted to make sure they were treated correctly, wanted to make sure they were treated right because it was an important vector for them to sell games through. Whether that's consoles, games, game-adjacent materials, those specific companies needed to be listened to, needed to have contractual provisions that protected them in order to make sure that they would give good space, that they would give good credit and sell things on behalf of the gaming industry. And so it looks to me like this is part and parcel of that conversation as well. Naughty Dog can say all this stuff about how they want to make sure people are treated right. On the other hand, I have a sneaking suspicion that the Best Buys of the world, maybe even the Amazons of the world, depending, have said, no, you can't have a digital release that is 6 months before we might otherwise be able to sell physical copies because whatever relationships we've had with you will be eaten up by those folks that can't wait, that don't want to resist, and just go buy it digitally. And so we got to keep those dates somewhat close. Final Fantasy is a bit of a special circumstance because this all happened essentially at the same time as its release window. But for you who gets 2 months of planning, no, you can't do this because we have these contractual commitments. And by the way, Sony, which Naughty Dog you're representing, is going to try to sell consoles through all of these various retail vectors very, very soon. They claim at the end of holiday 2020, but we shall see if they hit that mark. So we've got a very complicated situation here, and retailers that sell video games already know that digital is slowly taking over the entirety of that industry. And I tweeted out that I think that gamers should really be focusing on digital to kind of remove some of this threat that retail has over these things, because this doesn't make a lot of sense to me from a kind of strategic standpoint. One of the things that we have seen in the last month as all of this has gone down is the popularity of video games, is the popularity of those interactive pop culture type media that people are enjoying to stay sane in quarantine, and now would seem to be a good window to release a game. But Naughty Dog says, hey, they want to preserve the experience. We have to take them on their word, and yet I'm at least a little bit disinclined to take them 100% at their word here. We were bummed about this decision, but ultimately understood it's what's best and fair to all of our players. We're hoping that this won't be a long delay, and we'll update you as soon as we have new information to share. We wish you all, your families, and your friends the best of health. Thank you for being amazing fans and your continued support. Fair to all players is interesting, right? That if digital could be released, and it seems like every indication is that it could be, it's fairer to not release that digitally, even if maybe you've pre-ordered the game, and have you wait for the physical to be able to get on boats and planes and whatever other transport mechanisms are necessary to get physical versions into the hands of the players that prefer those physical versions. It's just a very interesting statement, and we live, of course, in a very interesting time right now in the United States and across the world. And so I think we are going to see a lot of companies have statements like this, have statements that delay games, have statements that try to explain their actions. But I don't think we're going to have a uniformity in how these companies wind up treating this specific scenario across the board. I think you're going to have different decisions. I think you're going to have maybe one company or two say, hey, we're going to release the digital right now. We're going to figure out how to get physical copies to people later. Or we're going to put your physical copies in the queue and understand that the Amazons of the world are going to deliver them in 6 to 8 weeks instead of 1 day, because that's the year 2020, boys and girls. And it's going to be interesting to follow. I don't know what Naughty Dog is thinking here. I don't know what Sony is thinking here. Certainly, the economics, the business lawyer in me suggests that they don't want to hold this for too long if it is done. That's going to be burning a hole in Sony's revenue pocket if they know that The Last of Us Part 2 is sitting on the shelf and can be sold immediately. And they probably want to help strategize around the release of The Last of Us Part 2 against the launch of the PlayStation 5. I think the PlayStation 5 is part and parcel to this whole story, and how it's doing, how its development's doing, what kind of date they have planned for it, what price, might help inform what's happening here. One of the things is that Naughty Dog is Sony for purposes of a decision like this. They don't make this on their own. And so does that factor in? Are they trying to get closer to the PlayStation 5? Is this a hint that the PlayStation 5 is going to be pushed back, that they're essentially rolling The Last of Us Part 2 forward, and they're going to roll the Ghost of Tsushima forward, and they're going to roll PlayStation 5 into spring 2021? Anything is possible. Anything is up for grabs. Not just because of the machinations of evil capitalists and corporations across the world, but because nobody has any idea what manufacturing capacity is going to look like next week, let alone next month or in next quarter. Nobody has any idea what ships are going to be available, what trucks are going to be available, and whether or not they can get games anywhere. Heck, at a fundamental level, no one really knows whether the internet and digital infrastructure, especially for video games and Netflix and other kinds of things, is going to hold up as quarantine continues. On the other hand, the optimists among you, maybe even me some days, say, hey, if we all do this, maybe it'll all be better in a much shorter order than we all think, and we can all hope for that. But the companies have to make decisions based on projections, have to make contingency plans based on what they can see. And one of the big problems right now is that nobody can see much of anything. We're all kind of operating in a fog. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of decisions people are making, because this statement suggests that this game is done or will be done shortly, and they're just going to hold it because they don't have trucks, trains, or boats available. Now, before we go on to me telling you about virtual legality and saying goodbye to you all, this is a live episode, so you just heard me talk for however many minutes that is, 20 straight minutes, good times. And I've got a few people in chat that I'd love to chat with and talk to. I've done a number of videos since quarantine started. I've been at a pretty good clip here. So feel free to raise any questions you have, any comments you want to have. Feel free to share around. I think I've got like a money button too. I never know how all those things work. Feel free to hit that. I think that gives me money. It's all good. But let me take a look at some of the comments that you say. If you could, at Hoeg Law, if there's something that you want me to specifically comment on, that's very helpful to me. That pops up in color on my screen. Otherwise, I'm just going to start looking at things. We've got a comment here that says PS5 is getting delayed. I think it might be. It's hard to say. I think at bare minimum, at the end of the year, it's very likely that if they do release Holiday 2020, it's going to be an extremely limited supply. And so does that release even count if it's a really, really small number? I think certainly a big release, even if they do wind up releasing something at the end of this year, the big release is going to be spring next year at the earliest. What other comments do we have? Hello, Hoeg. Hello, Phaedrus Socrates. It's nice to see you. You always good comments to these videos. I very much appreciate your support on the channel. It says, Game This War of Mine is currently unavailable for some weeks now. Basically, gameplay is adults killing each other to feed their kids. Logical. Maybe things have been removed because of content. I did mention earlier in this video that The Last of Us Part 2 is about a viral outbreak that goes horribly wrong, or it's about an infection at bare minimum that goes horribly wrong. And so it's possible this could be content related. You did hear rumors about James Bond when it got delayed early in March, before everybody started delaying and closing things, that potentially the plot of that movie had to do with bioterrorism or a viral outbreak. And that is the kind of thing where traditionally kind of media operators have been sensitive to showing something that relates specifically to the current world state. But I don't know if something like this War of Mine has been removed because it's offensive or at least problematic for folks that want to just enjoy themselves here in April 2020. Terrence Karan says, okay, so Hoeg question. Do you really believe it's only about the logistics, or do you think it's also the slowdown of development these past weeks? I don't think there's any reason to lie in this statement about the fact that you think that you're finishing the game if you are otherwise having problems with your productivity. I think everybody in the world would have understood if this third paragraph of this statement said, hey, you know, with all this going on, we've had to deal with remote infrastructure, and to be honest, it's slowing down the process, so we want to take a few more months. We don't know when it'll end because of the uniqueness of the situation, but we'll let you know as soon as we do. They don't say that. They don't say that very specifically. They say, hey, just if you're worried, we're fine. We're working on it. It's going to be done. But it's going to be done, and it's not going to be in your hands. Sorry about that. And that's a super interesting decision to make just in terms of messaging, right? Because as I just said, it's the easiest thing in the world to say, whoa, all of this weirdness has slowed us up. It's not going to be done. We'll let you know when it is. And maybe that's better in terms of corporate messaging. But this strikes me as more honest. And I think, like I said, really at the top of this video, we should be encouraging these companies to be as honest as possible, right? There's a big kind of impulse to do what I just did and say, oh, it's all slowing us down, because we don't want to be seen as putting something that's finished that so many people are going to enjoy on the shelf because we want it to be quote unquote fairer. Probably not just about fairness. It's something about marketing. It's something about contractual relationships. It's something about Sony. It's something about the PlayStation 5. There's all of these factors that are a little bit hard to describe in maybe a Twitter image, but it's not just about fairness. It's about a whole host of things that cause us to put a finished game on the shelf. And so I think we should be applauding the honesty here, even if we disagree with the ultimate decision, right? Even if I would personally advocate for a digital release, encourage people to do digital, potentially have Naughty Dog and Sony enter into contracts with Best Buy and Target and Walmart and everywhere else, that says we're going to do something special for Last of Us, that says if somebody buys it digital and they check a box that says they would have bought it at Walmart, we're going to remit some resources to you because you are our friends and we want to be able to sell you PlayStation 5s later. So we're going to make this worth your while. We know this is weird. Please release us from our contractual obligations, or please don't hate us if you don't have contract obligations. Just something to manage that relationship. I would prefer to see those things. I don't love this decision, but I do love that they have talked to us as if we are adults about what the decision was. Let's see what other comments we've got. I only have the one at Hoeg Law. If you want to get my attention, you can at Hoeg Law whenever you like. I wonder what BioWare would have done with Anthem if they could use COVID to get more time to finish the game, or would they have still shipped it as it is? You know, my ultimate question on this was, if you recall last year, end of March, Endgame came out. Avengers Endgame came out, and they would have fallen right in this window of horrible, horrible moviedom. And Endgame obviously is the most popular, most commercially successful movie of all time. And that's one of the what ifs that really fascinates me is, what if this kind of thing happened with movie theaters and the movie studio making the most money that they have ever made on a single movie? Would different decisions have been made? What would have occurred with Endgame? Would you have seen a $50 digital rental 2 weeks after all the theaters closed because it was that popular? That's one of those really interesting things. BioWare and Anthem, Anthem had enough structural issues that I don't know that there was any saving it in a reasonable amount of time. They're working on 2.0 right now. I hope for them the best because I've loved BioWare my entire video gaming career. And I really would love to see an Anthem that is a lot of fun and has a good plot and all that good stuff. So I hope that version 2.0 is really good, but I don't think in the immediate aftermath of the release early last year that they could have made tweaks over just a kind of viral outbreak period. Hey, Hoeg, hope you are well. We are well as a family can be that has been trapped together now for coming up on, I think, 21 days. We have good, happy, healthy relationships, but I have to admit we get on each other's toes just a little bit in this scenario. But we are happy and healthy right now. We're taking care of some immunocompromised family members, but we are enjoying our lives and trying to do the best that we can. I very much appreciate it. Since Sony did not delay Ghost of Tsushima yet, yeah, I think the yet's important there, which comes out late June, does that say that internally Sony hopes that this could be resolved sometime mid-May? I don't think any company in the world is making specific assumptions or taking specific actions based on a specific time frame. What you do if you're sitting in the C-level suites with these companies, especially a big, giant multinational company like Sony, is you're framing out contingency plans. What do our actions look like if the virus just dissipates in May? What does it look like if this is still going on in August? What do all of our plans look like while trying to coordinate thousands and thousands of people and hundreds of contractors and all of these various contract relationships, trying to kind of game theory out what all of these versions of reality look like? So I think this is the first step towards, okay, this is probably going to go a substantial amount of time. The next domino is Ghosts of Tsushima. I expect that one of the contingency plans is Last of Us Part 2 slides into Ghost of Tsushima territory, Ghost of Tsushima slides back, and then potentially, if needed, PlayStation 5 slides from there. Those are the big pillars that I see in kind of the Sony game plan. But that doesn't mean that that's accurate. It's all speculation, of course. And it doesn't mean that this first domino doesn't happen with the other dominoes because they don't know exactly what's going to happen, and they might need to change things up on the fly. When people say everything is fluid right now, that's not just governments, that's not just hospitals, that's virtually everything that you can possibly think of in the country. I can't speak to other countries, but I suspect it's the same. But every client that I work with, every relationship that I'm dealing with, every agency that I'm filing things with, everything, everywhere is fluid. And so I think Sony's making those plans, making those contingency arrangements, and this is the kind of thing that you get. And Naughty Dog's certainly a part of that conversation. They can't do things necessarily without them. They could, but it's not a great way to manage your subsidiary enterprises. And so Naughty Dog's a part of this conversation, but Sony is definitely in the room, if not the driver's seat, of making these kinds of determinations. Message retracted, no problem. What about Ghost of Tsushima? We just talked about that. I know ND development internally too well. I don't buy for a second they let contract workers work from home. Yeah, I think the situation in terms of data protection and things along those lines is an open question. Justin Green, I don't know whether or not you've been following what's happening with certain of these developers. I have a few anonymous sources on some of these things, and there are companies that would never, ever, ever for a minute have let any of this data go remote, that are essentially building secure infrastructure communications on double-end encryption and things like that from workers that are from home. Now, I know this with respect to some leads and some like really important people, not necessarily the contract workers for some of these studios, but there are places that I would have told you would never do this that are busy game theorying out how this works and are working with people to kind of experiment with how this operates. And I can tell you that from kind of personal information. I wonder if Naughty Dog is worried about spoilers and if certain aspects of the stories will cause people not to buy it after early spoilers, which could happen if some regions get early access. Well, spoilers is probably too broad. My feeling is it's like Square Enix. They are concerned about not being able to control their marketing platform, their narrative flow, to explode out with the marketing money that they want to at the end of the day. And so, yeah, spoilers are part of the story. Not really as you describe it, I wouldn't guess, that says, hey, this spoiler X, is going to prevent people from buying it. Although, hey, it could be. But more likely that just the nature of the internet and having what is, in The Last of Us Part 2, a narrative, story-driven experience of a linear variety is the kind of thing that can lose you sales if it's available on Twitch in its entirety early, right? That there are a perfect amount of people that are willing to essentially watch it as a movie, and these kinds of cinematic experiences lend themselves to that. And so we're not talking about somebody streaming Fortnite. We're talking about somebody streaming something that will have a beginning, middle, and end, and that you're going to get a large amount of kind of the satisfaction out of playing the game from watching the game. And so they're concerned about that. Very similar to how Square Enix is concerned about Final Fantasy VII Remake being out there, because as an RPG and a JRPG at that, it's a linear kind of progression. So those folks that would have otherwise bought it on April 10th, if they can watch it on Twitch on April 2nd, may be less inclined to do so. And hey, maybe that's overly protective. Maybe you want to say, Rick, but that's going to encourage people to buy it. They're not going to watch the whole stream. They're going to be excited about it. I tend to agree with that kind of argument, but it is these studios' livelihoods, and they get concerned about it. And even if we disagree with that concern, it's kind of their right to have. The last comment I've got here, if anybody wants to pop in before I sign off, please do so in the chat. Bart Jaxa says, we will see more stealth releases during pandemic time like Modern Warfare 2 Remastered, ? Activision dropped it at the perfect time and they had it ready for a year, it seems. COD brand is on fire. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people enjoying Call of Duty right now. And yeah, Modern Warfare 2 was, I think, a really good fit for what is happening right this second, because I think that's a $20 release. They just shadow drop it. It's a brand everybody knows. They don't have to market it. It's just brand new graphics and a coat of paint on what was already one of their most successful games of all time. And so $20, people need entertainment. We already understand the brand. Such an easy sales pitch. And I think Activision, as you say, was really brilliant to get it out there. Oh, and I've got a lot more comments here, so we'll hang out for a couple more minutes because, hey, we're all in quarantine, right? But I think that you are right that those kinds of projects make sense. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many are out there that fit exactly that, which is we don't really need to market it. It's from a brand that you know. It's not a full price purchase so that you don't have to feel bad if you don't know where your next paycheck is coming from. I mean, video games are also dealing with that at the same time, right? I did a video earlier today, which I thought was very important to get out there. If you didn't check it out, it talks about the Paycheck Protection Program that the U.S. Congress adopted and approved of last week. That essentially is a loan grant program that has loans that will be forgiven in their entirety if you are a small business and you're otherwise keeping up your payroll. But that includes sole proprietors. That includes self-employed individuals. They are trying to keep people from just falling onto unemployment. It's a very generous program. And so without those kinds of things, you are living in a situation where I can tell you Michigan unemployment is, I think, 3 times as big as it's ever been. And just all of the systems have broken. You don't know whether the systems are going to get you a check out to you if you're on unemployment here in Michigan. And it's just a big problem. And I think games are dealing with the fact that, yes, people want to spend amounts of money right now to be entertained, but there is some kind of point in time where you start to worry about paying for food. And that's going to be a continuing question. So, yes, I think shadow drops are going to be important. But one thing I would say is Modern Warfare 2 Remastered at $20 is probably even more important than the brand or what the game even is. If you can deliver that value at that kind of movie ticket price point, you're doing good if you're Activision or if you're a video game company. So if people have things on their shelves ready for that kind of treatment, yeah, you'll see more of that. It's hard to think that a lot of folks do. Yarden Angel, in your opinion, should next gen just be pushed to next year? Economy will be bad for quite a while. Wow, that's such a tough discussion because it's hard to say what exactly is currently in various states of undress with respect to next generation. How much the manufacturing processes have already been started on the consoles themselves, but also how the development has been occurring on the assumption that the consoles will be at saturation point X in the holidays this year, and then another saturation point, presumably higher, in the holidays next year. You don't necessarily want to move all those plans if you've also simultaneously got half dozen studios working on what will be PlayStation 5 games, but it's really hard to say. I think the most likely scenario is we see a very supply-constrained VIP access type release of both systems at the end of this year with a formal big launch announcement of the real kind of delivery of next generation in the spring of 2021. I can't make promises on that. It's all entirely speculative. Please don't invest anything or tell people that that's a promise. But that's what I can see happening as the most likely thing. Obviously, that's with me sitting here not knowing what the state of the world looks like in 6 months, let alone at the end of the year. But that's my best bet right now. Terrence Karan, nobody decides to not buy something because of spoilers. If they get spoiled, it means they care a lot about the game, so they are buying it. That's probably true. Although I would be interested to know if anybody disagrees with that on the latest Star Wars movie. I think a lot of people stayed away from it for that reason. Hoeg Law, completely unrelated. All right, cool. Let's talk about something different. And so feel free to ignore. I'm too far in now. Have you lost clients because they heard your POV from YouTube and disagreed? No, actually. One of the best and most remarkable things about Virtual Legality is that I have gained clients from this thing. And I had done it, back in November of 2018, I started this channel. I started this series primarily to talk about law and business because I was interested in it, but also because I had a number of clients that had YouTube channels, had YouTube presences, were talking about their data and problems they had with YouTube. And to be frank, I didn't fully understand what they were dealing with, and I wanted to have a better understanding. If you know me in real life, one of the things you'll know is that I love learning. I love learning new things. I love to figure out how to edit videos, how to use OBS, how to do things that I don't know how to do. And so I said, all right, we're going to try to do some YouTube stuff, because at the same time I had an article about The Last Jedi go viral and take me to places on the internet that I had never heard of before. I had never heard of Tumblr before. I wrote that article, and that wound up getting me a little presence on the internet. And I said, all right, we'll make a video out of that as kind of a test case. And that was a couple months before Virtual Legality, so I knew how to edit videos, and here I was. But no, I've gotten maybe, I don't know, more than a half dozen clients from Virtual Legality specifically, and from some of the things that I talk about, particularly when I'm talking about transactional items, talking about how mergers and acquisitions work, how I view contract negotiations. Hopefully when I make these videos and I have these conversations with you, I come off sounding pretty intelligent. That's the hope. That's the dream. And so I think for the most part, it's been a very good kind of mechanism for people to get to know me. And one of the things I always tell my prospective clients is that the lawyer relationship is much like a doctor. You have to be able to be honest with them. You have to be able to tell them the warts on your company and to feel free to do so. So even if I'm the smartest guy that you've ever heard, you want to be able to have a relationship with me. And that's not going to be perfect for everybody in the world. I always recommend to people to talk to a couple of potential lawyers, because you want to have that personal relationship. You have to have that level of trust. You have to believe in them in terms of their intelligence and the legal advice they're going to give you. But you also have to have that kind of relationship that is going to lead to that good advice. Justin Green, Hoeg Law. One thing I think is glossed over is the expectation that a lot of gamers will still be in a place to even buy a PS5 when they come out, whether it's $400 or $500. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that the gaming industry is grappling with in general is we are only right now at the cusp of kind of seeing all of that salary go out the drain, seeing all those hourly wages go out the drain, and trying to figure out, not are people going to be in the mood for a new console and games in the holiday of 2020, because I have every belief that they will be. This is going to be a tough year. I don't think that anybody is at all surprised to hear me say that. But they're going to be in the mood for those kinds of things and those shiny bells and whistles. Are they going to be able to afford it? Or even if they can't afford it, are they going to feel comfortable enough dropping $500 when maybe things have recovered a little bit, but the feeling of the room is that a precipitous drop could happen at any point in time? So I think you are absolutely right to call that out. I have no doubt in my mind that Microsoft and Sony are currently wargaming exactly what people are likely to be feeling at that point in time. But even surveys aren't a help right now because people don't know what they're going to be feeling like at that point in time. It's a very, very weird year. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I said I suspect a supply-constrained release will still happen holiday 2020 for a number of reasons, kind of the way pipelines work, the way your timelines work, and because you want to kind of get things in motion. But it would be a surprise to see a full blowout of these releases at the end of the year. To me, I'd be happy to see it. I would love to see that, but I would be surprised to see that at the end of the day. Angel Grunts. Sony wants to launch the game, not lazily secrete it out to the marketplace. Okay. Initial sales are important, and that's advertising, influencers, review embargoes, etc., all at once. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the underlying statement here is that we want to have a blowout. That blowouts are good. That's the best way to market, and we don't want to just have it released digitally. I think in 2020, you could actually do some really cool stuff with digital blowouts and all sorts of stuff on camera and still get the releases. You could still have the influencers and people talk about things. I'm not sure the live element is as important as marketers think it is. And one thing I would really love to see right now, because this is the great reason to do it, experiment now, because what other better excuse could you possibly have, is try some of this stuff. I think there's a lot of goodwill to be mined from people that are stuck in their homes, from companies that try to think outside the box and come up with different ways to make your lives better in this specific situation. And when I say goodwill, I mean money as well. I think Naughty Dog trying to work around this, figure something else out that gets you a blowout, even if it's a blowout that looks mightily different from what it might have looked like in 2019, is helpful. And I think a lot of people would feel pretty good about them. I don't think people feel bad about this. And again, I'm not making this video to castigate them. It's just that I might have tried to look for a different avenue of addressing this concern. Hoeg Law. I'm on my way out to work home soon. No quarantine for me. I hope you're an essential worker. Damp imp BDSD, but best of luck to you. Stay safe out there. I work from home as my normal workspace. This quarantine is mainly affecting my non-work life. I still got to watch that latest Star Wars movie. I've been hiding from spoilers. Yeah, I mean, you might want to just hide from the Star Wars movie. But if you don't, we've got a wonderful postmortem which features a guest appearance from my wife. I think the only appearance she makes on this channel. If you're at all interested in hearing from Ms. Hoeg. Justin Green, lol, awesome. I'm sure that's in relation to something that I said, so I'm going to take credit for it. There's an argument between various folks in the chat. The next one, Hoeg Law. So confirmed, this YouTube channel is just a free sly advertising campaign. Oh, for Hoeg Law. Oh, undoubtedly. I think if you've got a small business like mine, if you've got a business that is constantly trying to figure out how to market yourself differently from the big players, and big law firms have oodles of cash, and they have marketing departments, and they have all these professionals. When I went out on my own, one of the things that I said was, I don't want to be the cheaper and slightly worse version of the place that I just left. I was an equity partner at the biggest law firm in Michigan, and I don't want to just be a smaller, cheaper version of that. I want to market differently. That's why you saw me sponsor Easy Allies. That's why I'm a sponsor of MGO Blog. I'm a huge Michigan Wolverine fan. And I market the company very, very differently. And YouTube was a part of that, was a part of examining that. And thankfully, I've got to meet a lot of people. I've got to have a lot of comments, a lot of great discussions with folks. And we're 201 some odd episodes into Virtual Legality. And I think for the most part, people think pretty well of Virtual Legality, the series. We talk a lot about it in various places, in newspapers and periodicals that I wouldn't have expected. I think we've been featured now in the Washington Post and the New York Times and Variety and some other places, which is super cool. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if this didn't market at all, if I didn't monetize any of the videos, if YouTube decided to never suggest any Virtual Legality episode ever again, which I will tell you some days feels like a remote possibility, then I would still do it because I enjoy having these conversations with you. It's a microphone and curiosity and a will to kind of look at all this stuff. So I'm very glad that it works for a lot of people that have subscribed to the channel and have recommended it to their friends, which, by the way, if you're still with me right now, recommend this to your friends. Tell people that we are here. We're still very, very small in the YouTube spectrum of the world, but we love having these conversations, and I would love to have them with even more of you. All right. I think this will be the last comment unless anybody else jumps in. Alan or Hoeg Law, any interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits about the analytics of your channel, ages, countries, etc.? Yeah, I'll tell you an interesting tidbit. I found this fascinating. This hasn't changed in the last year. We are really big in Dublin. I wouldn't have expected that. For whatever reason, Dublin is our most popular city. And I suspect there's just a cadre of Dubliners that just get together and go to the local pub and listen to Virtual Legality and want to hear about United States business and law. That's the biggest tidbit that really strikes me as interesting. I can tell you that the video game-based videos that I do tend to skew male as far as YouTube is concerned. And that whenever I kind of broach out of that into more news and politics or talking about statutes in general, especially when I talk about YouTube and its operations, if you were here in November and you heard me talking about COPPA and all of those things, that actually skews female. So that's pretty interesting because it suggests to me that in terms of looking for YouTube gaming content, a lot of males are dominating that particular kind of conversation, when outside of that, at least in Virtual Legality, a lot of females like the content as long as I don't talk about games. So that's been interesting. Those are analytical tidbits. And then lastly, I'm glad you continue this just because you enjoy it. It's informative, even if I don't agree with your point of view all the time. Here's what I will say. That's a great comment. I really appreciate it. I will say the same thing to that comment that I say to everybody that asks me on this, and that's on Twitter and everywhere else, and I've been called all sorts of names everywhere. I think it would be a very boring world if you agreed with everyone all the time, or even, honestly, if you agreed with any one person all of the time. Reasonable disagreement really is, for me, the spice of life. I love to have these conversations. I love to try to understand another person's perspective. That's why hopefully you'll never hear me engage in ad hominem attacks. I like to presume good faith out of your argument. And that's why even when you see me respond to things like to Tom Scott's video on copyright, who, by the way, I think did a great job. Check out my video, of course, absolutely. But check out his video for a good description of the lay of the land of intellectual property, particularly in the United States, even though I don't think he's from here. He's at least was described to me as a big celebrity in the United Kingdom. But that I always assume good faith in the argument, and I talk about the arguments, even when I disagree with them, out of that premise of good faith. That's the way I like to operate. That's the way this channel will operate as long as I'm in control of it. And so my hope is that that engenders a good kind of intellectual community of curious people that want to be educated, want to be illuminated, hopefully on the stuff I know about. Although sometimes people ask me questions that I don't know about. We engage in good conversations about those things as well. But you won't hear me getting negative just to get negative. I think that exists too much online. And so while I am a lawyer, while you will see me being pedantic and discussing things at a very granular level on occasion, and you might not agree with me, that's okay. I have no problem with that. I want to respect everybody's opinion, and I appreciate that you still pop in, even if you don't always agree with my point of view, which I think is a great way to end the video today. This has been Virtual Legality Live, the second video of the day. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you, everybody who's joined me in chat, who has commented and talked to me about these various things. You can also find me on Twitter at Hoeg Law. We are having these conversations there as well. I mentioned the Paycheck Protection Program video I put up earlier today. Highly recommend checking it out. If you're an independent contractor, if you're a small business operator, if you're anything remotely like that, talk to your accountant, see if you can apply to this, because that money is going to go fast, and it really is a very generous program due to the current state of the world. If you caught this on YouTube in its archive form, or if you hung out with us in chat today, thank you so much for doing so. We love having these conversations. I don't know whether this will be in podcast form, but if I put it in podcast form and you wind up listening to it there, thank you for checking it out and listening to it there. I appreciate that as well. This has been Virtual Legality Live for today, and I will catch you on the next episode whenever it goes up. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.